Well, let's have fun here. So again, my name is Meredith. To quickly introduce myself, I currently work with two companies. For the past 3.5 years, I've worked with one company specifically dealing with small business, startups, and entrepreneurs. So I think that fits this group well. And basically, it's people that don't need a full-time HR, but they do need advice from time to time. And I also work with a company called Profiles International, which is an assessment tool that brings some data and science to making otherwise subjective decisions about people. I've selected about 6 topics to touch on briefly, so hopefully some of those fit with learning for you. I always just think HR, quote, are things that tend to kind of go on the back burner for other things that are more important until something goes wrong. So here's some information and help you avoid having something go wrong, hopefully. So true or false? Employees are entitled to take 2 weeks vacation during their first year in a new company. So that is technically false. So in Ontario, an employee is entitled to 2 weeks vacation after they've earned it, completing their entire first year. A lot of employers will let people take it within that first year. And in some places like California, an employer is not even required to give employees vacation at all. Next, so true or false? As of September 1st, 2014, under the OHSA, companies are required to put employees through a workers and or supervisors awareness training session. So that's actually false as well. That was actually as of July 1st of this year. When I emailed most of my clients just to remind them before the deadline, only one was even aware that that existed at all. So the repercussions of not knowing or not complying would be receiving a compliance order or having pesky people coming around to check on you, or with ongoing failure, there's actually a pretty hefty charge and fine. So next. Basically, I'm just going to go through some key areas that are important for small businesses and try to help you think in maybe some new and different ways about things. So HR, that's probably you. I actually struggle to find good alternative verbiage or a title for HR. I actually don't really like identifying myself as kind of HR or traditional HR because of some of these reasons here. HR tends to be seen as qualitative. It doesn't really have a direct correlation to revenues like sales or accounting, so it often gets put on the back burner. But I would actually agree that your people really directly impact your revenues. In a lot of small companies, HR is done by you, the owner, and I think you can do it on your own, and you might be okay, not necessarily optimal. And what about some of the stuff that you don't know, like some of the last slides? So I view HR as a specialty just like bookkeeping, and I really do believe that people are your most valuable asset. They can move your company ahead, they can hold it back, or they even have the power to shut you down. Most people think HR is dry and it's about filling out this paper and it's just, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that. So what I do is I look at what are the rules that you have to follow from a legal perspective. Are you following the rules? Do you even know? And are you following too many rules? Maybe just rules that have always been there. And those could be holding you back. They could just be annoying your team. And they can waste a lot of time following up on an unnecessary circle for everyone just because you're following the rules. So I argue that HR can actually be fun rather than dreaded. And I really help companies think in a different way to get rid of the dumb rules or just rules that are there for the sake of being there. And those are the things that impede growth. So our first topic would be employment agreement. A common scenario that I enter into with new clients, unfortunately, is usually after a problem arises. So when an employer is hiring a person, they're not really focused on kind of how or when the person is going to leave. But it really only takes one drama queen to create problems. So we've all worked with someone in the past, or maybe the lucky people haven't, but they kind of tend to create drama, pull people into drama, they blame others, they don't really take responsibility for their own work, if one of those kind of people leaves your company unhappy, they're pretty likely they're going to cause you problems when they leave. And if you don't have an agreement or yours isn't drafted appropriately, the drama queens can really try to take even more than they're entitled to, and usually they would win. So if you don't have even a letter of offer or a simple agreement, and it needs to be signed off on by both you, the employer, and the employee, you really can run into some big problems. And a couple of stories that I can think of. I've recently been talking with a company, and they purchased the assets of a bankrupt company and also decided to hire a person from that company because they kind of saw the value of having that person with the intellectual property or knowledge that could keep the consistency of the products that they'd purchased. So the person had worked with the old company for 9 years, and now they've worked with this company for 11 years. And over the 11 years, the person's caused tons of problems with other workers. They're late every day. They take extra breaks during the workday, or they take days off and don't even call in. And they're really producing way lower than others in the same role. So guess what? This company still does not have agreement, nor did they. And now they want to try to get rid of the person. But after speaking with lawyers, they potentially have to pay that person for 20 years severance pay rather than the 11 years that the person's there for because they didn't have a simple agreement. Another story is like the client I was working with on a totally different project, and I got a panicked phone call, and it seems that their admin person, as it turned out, had mental health issues, and they built up a bunch of tension toward their boss, who was the owner. That person had a big blow up at the office. They quit then and there and tried to write their own final paycheck and called the police when the owner told them not to do that. And that was all happening in the reception area of the company in front of the client. So for this example, the employer actually wrote their own agreement that they did from a Google search. And in it, the person was called an employee, but had actually been treated like a contractor. So different taxes were paid out by the company. And really, employees and contractors also have different rights. So the entire contract would have been thrown out in a court of law just due to using incorrect language. And unfortunately for you as employers, employment standards really lean heavily toward protecting the employee, not the employer. So in this instance, the company could have owed the person a lot of extra money, been in really hot water for not paying correct deductions or taxes, and at worst actually been shut down by CRA. So what do you actually need to include in an agreement? That's the next slide. Law is kind of evolving in Canada pertaining to termination language and agreements and contracts. What I did is I took 6 main points from an employment law summit in 2013. And these were based on actual cases employers had. So I'll try to help you avoid some legal cases. So keep it simple, really. The more complicated and verbose, the more room for misinterpretation and the more points for people to dispute. Make sure the context and framing of the relationship is worded appropriate to what it actually is. So again, back to my example, if the person's a contractor, you can't call them an employee. You can't call the document an employment agreement, so you have to change the language. Also, make sure your agreement stands across time if and when someone's role is going to change. So you can have a clause that indicates the agreement's going to stand across time, or just that the role will evolve, or you can not be too specific with what the responsibilities are so that you can add on to that. And I know in entrepreneurial settings, you know, a job description changes and you might jump in and do something different every day. So you don't want to be writing up all these different agreements. If you do want to be really concise in your agreement regarding the expected job responsibilities, then you actually have to draft and have an employee sign off on a new contract every time their role changes. Otherwise, then it might not be binding. So think of that one. Make sure the words aren't too ambiguous, though. So think about both the literal and the practical meaning of the words in your agreement, and think about how it actually carries out in the actual business setting. So are the words and requirements reasonable? Do they match what you're actually expecting? What does with cause mean? So this seems to be something most people don't really know about. Make sure you fall in line with the Employment Standards definition of with or without cause. The majority of termination cases will actually be without cause. Terminating with cause is pretty much almost impossible unless you have clear evidence of the employee doing something illegal. So being incompetent or maybe not showing up to work, those actually don't qualify as with cause. And most importantly, get the employee to sign off on it. It sounds simple, but that's often missed. So next slide. If an employee is terminated within the first year of employment, the employer is required to give the employee notice of termination or severance pay. So that's actually false. It's not severance pay. It would be called termination pay, and people seem to confuse that a lot as well. So under employment standards, after 3 months of someone working there, you have to give them notice or pay them in lieu of the notice 1 week per year of employment. So with that question, if it was 1 year, if you wanted to end their employment as of today, then you would just pay them for 1 week's notice. So termination pay and severance pay are two different things, and I can explain that further later if people need. The next slide, hire slowly, fire fast. It's a motto that I use, and it works in a lot of different contexts. So really termination, I guess, to me, it's best to deal with negative situations quickly. And if you do have to make that decision to remove a person from your team, it's better to not have that drag on. I think if you do deal with something quickly, it really positively impacts your credibility with the rest of the team. It eliminates opportunities for them to do further damage internally or externally if they deal with customers. And it opens up the opportunity to have a different great person on your team. No one enjoys terminating someone, but make sure you stop them and do your due diligence and try to rectify a situation before just moving or jumping to that decision to let someone go. If you do decide you have to go ahead, preparing can help you avoid a lot of tension that comes with the surprise. You might also avoid an explosive scenario where you're caught saying the wrong thing because you're in reactive or emotional mode. So to just go through these points is really plan ahead. What will you say? What's the reason you're giving for terminating them? And how much information do you want to leave out or keep to a minimum? Have a witness, and that gets missed a lot, but it avoids kind of a he said, she said scenario, or maybe even worse, he did, she did. So make sure you just put it in writing and have the person sign off on the document that just lays out the particulars like the end date, etc. Don't discuss any point of misconduct unless you actually have clear evidence. So if you can't prove something or things are a matter of he said, she said, try not to discuss them at all. I would keep it pretty brief, and if you do have to discuss or get into those, be really careful with the words you use to describe a situation. Keep the meeting brief, and I would say also try not to focus on the negative. Also, if a reference is requested for later, I would keep that fairly brief and simple and be pretty selective about the information you give. And also make sure you're consistent with the information that you give the employee when you are terminating them. I think the less you say, the better. This keeps it less focused on all the issues leading up to the termination and just more on going through the basic process to end things. And it leaves less room for litigation later. Also, just consider how that will impact a specific person. So are they close to retiring, or do they have family support? The personal aspect will impact their emotional response. So this can kind of just help you prepare for that. And also consider how that will impact others still on your team. So people really establish relationships, especially in small businesses. People continue to stay in touch, and people really do talk. So chances are that that person's version of how the termination was handled will be discussed with the other people on your team. So be careful of that. And really just try to keep, point 7, keep the emotion out and just keep it factual. So moving on from something a bit negative, true or false, Canada is the 9th highest user of Facebook in the world. Actually, there's a theme here. I seem to have a lot of false slides. Canada is actually the 6th highest in the world. So social media, I wanted to touch on this briefly just because of all the changes in the past 5 years. And I've really observed that most small companies haven't addressed this at all. Facebook has millions of users, and the average time spent per day by people is 23.7 minutes. So next slide. Social media may not be a part of your brand. You might not use it for your business, but it certainly can impact it. I think due to the immediate nature of online activity, your brand is in constant threat of damage. For some of your people, managing the social media is part of their role. So how do you want them to portray your brand? But above and beyond that, I would venture to say that every employee has personal social media platforms, plural, going. What are they saying about your company, their job, their boss, you, their client? So do you have a policy? Do you have it in writing? So it can even just be a really simple few sentences on your employment agreement, and just a few things to consider if you don't have a policy or you're writing one is comments made on their own technology versus company technology. So when it's on an employee's device, employers still do have rights regarding the content. Comments made about different people involved with work. Comments that could cause issues between employees. And often employees in small businesses are friends, so that can have an impact. Comments that impact your brand. So confirm to what extent an employee can speak for your brand if that's part of their job, or even comment on it on an online space. Comments might reveal proprietary information. And how much access to employee data do you, the employer, have? In 2012, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that employees may have a reasonable expectation of privacy, even on company technology or computers. But as the employer, you still can confirm in your policy that you will monitor that, or to what degree, in order to protect yourself. Or also think about access to or use of company data. And again, just have people sign off on it. The next topic is, how much are you supposed to pay someone? It's a tough question. Entering into salary negotiations can be tough as well, especially if you don't really even know where to start. So how do you even know if what your budget holds is appropriate for the position you're hiring for? Did you set a budget, or are you just kind of waiting to see what your final person's demands are? And do you have almost I hate using comprehensive, can't think of another word, but kind of a comprehensive plan or approach to salary across your company, or are you just making ad hoc offers every time you hire? So to start off with, you really have to have an idea of what the price tag attached to that job would be, and I look at these 3 factors here. So you want to be paying the appropriate salary for what the role is, not just what the person is expecting or asking for. Also, what's happening in the current market? So what would it cost to replace the person if they went to another company who pays more, and now you're looking at candidates that are also being paid more? Sometimes there's weird bubbles of certain jobs where suddenly people are being paid a bunch, or they're only going to do contracting, not permanent. So all different things could happen there. And also, what does the person bring to the table? So maybe they have extra education or skills or experience, or they're bringing clients along. So look at what kind of impact that individual person can bring to the role. A trick that I use is I ask people, what are you currently making when I'm interviewing them, instead of what do you want? Because, we'd all like $1 million, but that's fairly arbitrary. So it gives you a good starting place as to, are you on the same ballpark, and is the level of the role on the same ballpark? And I always say, if your payroll was left out for people to see, would there be any surprises? So people do talk, again, and would there be disgruntled people? So again, back to my point is make sure you do have a consistent approach for salary for everybody rather than just making random offers as new roles come up. So underpaying. So perhaps you've done your research. You have an idea of the midpoint for a salary for a particular job. You can find that online fairly easily. Where that becomes a problem, though, is when you're paying top people a mid-range salary. So highly specified roles, they do require higher pay. You have a more limited base of people who can actually even do the job, or maybe the job requires lots of education or specific education, or maybe specific language skills, or you just have a really long demand list. Usually when companies see the difference in the caliber of people, if you pay mid-range or low versus high, you're going to want the top people. So you have to ask yourself, can you afford that? Or what are some things you might be able to give and take on to put it into your ballpark? Overpaying. Being a hard worker doesn't really mean that a person should be paid more. So yeah, we all like people who work hard, but you have to pay for what the value of the role is. I can give you an example of overpaying. I have a client who's overpaying their production staff by a lot, actually. Some employees aren't happy, and so they keep looking for another job, but they can't find another job on that same pay level, and so they stay, but now they're not happy, and then they're kind of impacting morale. The boss is losing credibility with the other team members. There's lower productivity, and then a lot of the employer's time is spent having to deal with those politics. So you want to be careful of that. Giving a raise. So just because an employee asks for a raise doesn't mean you should always result in a raise. A lot of people will justify their need for a raise because they now have a new baby or they need a new car or other kind of personal reasons. So it's important to keep the raise discussion relevant to the job and the person's performance, not those personal things. If it makes sense to give a raise based on their performance, or maybe they've taken on more or added value, then give them a raise. As a small business, I think one of the great things is that you can adapt and change quicker than a large company where you have to follow rigid salary caps and things like that. There might be times when they're doing a great job, but their current role just simply isn't worth any more than what you're paying. So at that point, it's important to look for ways to either promote the employee to a different role or add value to their current role, not only just to keep them happy with their pay, but also engaged in their job. And if they're ready for more, chances are they're bored as well and might be looking elsewhere. If employees believe they're being paid below their value, their choices, I guess, are, I'd say, three things. They can leave for a better offer, they can stay, but they lower their level of engagement, or they can ask for a raise. People usually only ask for this once, and if you say no, then their choices are back to leaving for a better offer or staying, but with lower engagement. And bonuses. So if you give arbitrary bonuses, people just come to expect them. And it's a common, I shouldn't say mistake, but thing that I see a lot of companies do. It's Christmas, let's give everyone some money or whatever it might be. If you give out bonuses with a structure in place where people see the connection between the effort and work they're putting in and the reward they get out of it, that actually creates motivation. It also shows that you're thinking about making decisions rather than just assigning an arbitrary number or having favoritism to some people. And I think bonuses are a great way to increase salary to make employees happy and want to stay with you, but it actually saves you money if they don't reach the targets and aren't motivated. So the next topic is touching on leadership. So employees don't quit their companies, they quit their boss. I'd say, especially among younger generations, among the top reasons other than money people leave is a bad boss. I was looking at a survey the other day where in answer to the question, was the attitude of your direct supervisor or manager the primary factor in your quitting a previous job, 35% of respondents said yes. I would actually wager this number is quite a bit higher. And from the thousands of interviews I've done over the years, other than money, a bad boss has always been the most prominent reason for people leaving a job. And interestingly then, most of the other reasons people give to leaving, they all share something in common. They all tie back to the boss or different decisions or things that the boss has done. So, oops, we lost our slide. Anyway, so at your company.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, it's coming back. The connection got lost for some silly reason. But
okay. And forgive me if I'm being really fast. I'm just trying to cover some points, but we can always go back and talk about stuff. So at your company, people see you or their boss as the big bad boss, or they see you or their boss as their best friend, or they see you as their team member who they work with rather than their big bad boss that they work for. To illustrate the idea of leaders versus managers, I like to use promotions. So often companies promote from within, which is not a bad idea, but where the problems happen is that usually the person promoted has either been there the longest or is the top producer in their area. Just because you know a lot about the product or service or have spent a long time in the company does not mean you're a good leader. Just because you're, say, the top salesperson doesn't mean you're a great sales manager or even want to be one. So as an entrepreneur or business owner, you've assumed those leadership responsibilities. So stop and ask yourself, what kind of leader are you? Are you too busy in your day-to-day running the business to actually think about that or think of concrete ways to develop your people? The boss or the manager or the leader should be there to lead and facilitate and support the team's success. One of the things, which it can be hard to do when you're an entrepreneur and you're used to doing it your way, or we're a one-man show for quite a while, is that, it's hard to stick to my way or the highway, or that's just the way that we're going to do it. So try to avoid that. And really the point of having the team is that the sum of all the parts is more than the individual. And then at your company, if people have proven to be reliable in getting all their work done, people have the option to work from home and come and go with some flexibility. Or everyone has to come in at the same time and people are watching when they arrive and leave. So I just want to touch on kind of culture and motivations. And I think people who work in small entrepreneurial companies, they're flexible to adapt to your needs, and they'll wear many hats when you need them to, or they'll put up with the challenges of and changes of ups and downs of being in a small business or a startup. So why not be flexible back? Employees are individual people, and they all have different motivations. So more and more what I'm seeing is companies of all sizes are actually trying to be adaptable to meet different motivations for their good people. So if you meet people's motivations, it is proven over and over, they will perform better and they'll actually want to stay with you. And I think there's lots of small or free things you can do to try to meet those motivations or create your culture. So maybe someone's a parent and they want to come in early and leave at 3 to pick up their child. So if it doesn't interrupt the workflow or leave a gap, why not accommodate? The working from home privilege. Companies also are implementing that a lot more often. I think it enables you to increase your talent pool, really, to include people from further away. But it also enables people to work even on snow days. It saves people a commute time every day, and that equals more work time, and people are less frustrated. But my note here is really, if you're going to offer these flexibilities, people have to earn those, their privileges, and they also have to make sense of your business demands. So just a quick definition of culture. I think finding people's motivations and being a good leader, that's all tied to culture. And I think either of these definitions here can apply to a corporate culture, not just the social idea of one, because it all has to do with collective achievement. So our final slide here really is just the challenge. And I just challenge you to be as strategic about your people and creating your culture as you are about creating and developing your product or your brand. Interestingly, in a poll conducted by Monster, which is a job search engine, 82% of people said their company did nothing at all to try to keep them on board. And while 88% of employees place really high value on employee incentive and programs, only 20% of Canadians feel they're actually getting these in their current companies. So it sounds to me as people have a lot of incentive to be going somewhere else. Are you so busy running your companies that you're kind of going about your day-to-day responsibilities and just hoping everyone will show up to work and get along? Or are you being proactive in creating a culture and doing your kind of, quote, HR stuff? You know, the Apple culture, the Google culture, those weren't created by accident. And every company has a culture, whether you stop to define it. But why not create one that inspires people, enables you to develop a great product, enables you and your people to have fun while you're at work. So I would ask you, what makes your company a desirable place to work? And are your employees merely satisfied, or do they actually brag about working for you? Do you even know what they'd say? So I'll leave you with these questions then. So what is your culture? Have you defined it? Describe your culture in 10 words. Could your team members do the same? And do you think those responses would actually match? So HR and culture can be viewed as qualitative, back to our initial slide, but they can actually be really key in making sure you create a space where people want to be, and that attracts top people. People have a space to be creative. People feel happy, and happier people are more productive. And those are my contact details there. So those are my two companies. If you're confused by the two emails, and that's my phone. And I'm also on LinkedIn as well, if that's something you'd like to do to connect.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the little technical difficulties.